Welcome. I think that we have our guests filing in right now. There's pretty soon we'll start the program, but while you're waiting, this is part of the Trace series where we revisit exhibitions from the last 6 years of the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery. And today we'll be doing Invisible Threads. My name is Maya Allison. I'm the founding executive director of the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery and the chief curator at NYU Abu Dhabi. And today we're going to visit an exhibition from 2016 called Invisible Threads, Technology and Its Discontent. And I'm going to introduce our guests in just a moment. For those of you who haven't been to a webinar before, you'll notice that on the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A button, and you can use that to ask questions, and the participants will see your questions, but the rest of the audience won't. And then towards the end of the conversation, we'll start taking questions from the audience, but we'll keep an eye on it as it's going, so please feel free to join the conversation. I would like to start by thanking the team of NYU Abu Dhabi. Every once in a while, I'd like to sort of remind people how much goes into this behind the scenes, and in particular, Sebastian Grube and Sonali Shirodkar, who are producing these events behind the scenes. And thank you guys both very much. Invisible Threads is also a really important turning point for us in terms of our trajectory, because that was the start date, the first exhibition of two staff members who are still with us, Hala Sella, who's the Assistant Director of Business Operations, and Kim Moynet, who's the Museum Registrar. Both had this as their first exhibition, so this is a moment to acknowledge their 4-year mark. And now I'm going to ask the curators and artists to introduce themselves. Bana, will you start?
Sure. My name is Bana Kattan. I am currently in Seattle, but I'm based in Chicago normally. I'm a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago. And I was the former team member at NYUAD. I was a curator with Maya for 5 years. And I co-curated this exhibition with Scott Fitzgerald, who I'll pass the mic
to. Thanks, Benna. I'm Scott Fitzgerald. I'm currently a faculty member and director of the Integrated Digital Media Program at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering in Brooklyn. Prior to this, I was at NYU Shanghai, and before that, I was at NYU Abu Dhabi, where I worked with Maya and Bana and the rest of the team. So I'm really happy to come back, as it were, and join everybody again. In addition to that, I'm also a practicing artist who works with emerging technologies. And I'm also currently getting a PhD in media study at the University of Buffalo, where my work is really about sort of the ways in which power is expressed through technology and in culture. And so this exhibition is really nice because in some ways it kind of pushed me onto that in a lot of ways. So I'm very glad to be able to revisit it all with all of you. And so I'd like to pass this off to Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Dewey-Hagborg. I'm an artist and an educator and occasional curator. And I'm currently a visiting assistant professor at NYU Abu Dhabi in interactive media. And in terms of my artistic work, it tends to focus on biotechnology and the relationship between biology and human culture. And we'll be talking a bit about that later.
Great, welcome. And Scott, welcome back virtually to Abu Dhabi. So Scott was one of the founding heads of the department that Heather is now in. So there's a nice lineage here. And of course, Bana used to work in my department. So you're actually seeing this wonderful kind of rhyme in our relationships. Over the course of the evening tonight, we're going to look at the past exhibition and kind of go on a virtual tour of this exhibition, and also talk about what it means to be an artist who curates and a curator who is an educator, and this intersection that we share. And I'm also pleased to announce that Heather and I are in the process of co-curating an exhibition that will open in late October. All things going as planned, and it will be a virtual exhibition. So more details on that will come out soon, but it's a really wonderful opportunity for us to sort of talk about, to learn from Bana and Scott and their process. And of course, Heather has curated quite a bit as well in the past. So I'm looking forward to getting into the abstract ideas behind these questions. I'm going to start by launching our website for the archive of this exhibition. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should see the screen for Invisible Threads, Technology and its Discontents. And here we have an installation view. On the left is a piece by Sybren Bierstig, and on the right is the piece that was on view by Heather in that exhibition. Our exhibition archive pages include sort of a summary of the exhibition, an excerpt or the full essay as well. And then along the right-hand side, you'll see, in addition to the publications, the press release, downloadable versions of the brochure and the youth guide and the programs guide. And also you can look at them on the screen. So the exhibition brochure, what this doesn't show you is the wonderful shimmering silver color of the text on this. But this has the curator's essay as well as bits about each of the artists in the exhibition. And then the youth guide, which is one of our sort of signature projects. For every exhibition, we commission an artist based in the UAE to illustrate a guide to the exhibition for the young audience. And we often do family workshops and tours, especially for families with young children. And this one as well, it has this wonderful illustrations of Scott and Bana as the curators. And there's this opportunity for the students to try to locate these different artworks. And they talk about each of the artworks. And then what you can't see is that there were these silver star stickers that people could use to identify the different pieces in the show. So here's a map of the gallery space from above, and then the students could identify the works as they found them in the gallery as a kind of treasure hunt. And this is a project that's run by Ala Idris, who's our Assistant Director of Education and Publications, and it was her project that she kind of brought into being, and it's turned into one of the most wonderful parts of our project that I'm very proud of. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the images. In the events section, there are images from the opening reception, and there are quite a few images. So if you were there, you should go and look. You'll probably see yourself in those photographs. Now I'm going to start with the installation views, and I'm going to ask the curators to walk us through the exhibition. I think, Scott, you're starting.
Yeah. So the exhibition was one of the things that we wanted to do was really talk about technology not as something that is new, but really it has some sort of historical context to it. And you can see the giant shiny orb with antenna coming out of it. On the left-hand side is a piece called My Sputnik by Michael Joaquin Gray. And we included this piece. It's a 1-to-1 scale replica of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite that was launched in Earth orbit. And we chose this because we felt that it sort of signified a particular moment in time where, there was technology sort of heralded this moment where there was immense potential, but also in hope, but then also for a large portion of the population of the world, there was this moment of sort of like fear that sort of emerged out of this moment. And we really thought about this particular piece as the fulcrum around which a lot of the other works sort of balanced off of. So it sort of encapsulated both sort of aspirationally what we could do with these tools, but then also showed potentially how it could be really anxiety inducing at the same time. So I don't know, Maya, do you want me to address the works that are just in here, or? Oh, you,
Scott, why don't you talk about My Sputnik and then maybe also Angels and then Addie Wagenecht, and then I'll take over.
Okay, that sounds good.
So just here's a close-up of Sputnik. In the background is Addie Wagenecht. And then you want to start with which one?
I'll start with Addie.
Okay, so for viewers, that's the one on the left with the strings. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so well, you can also, just to really talk about Sputnik real quickly, for those of you that you were there, you'll remember that that piece was like right in the center as you walked in, and really sort of like had a, I don't know, it had a fairly commanding presence in the space. When you entered immediately to the left, and what you see here on the left here is a piece by Addie Wagenecht. Addie Wagenecht that is a series of circuit boards with Ethernet ports on them, and they're all tied together with Ethernet cable. And when the piece is activated, the whole thing starts to sort of glow and becomes iridescent, much like you would imagine a server room or a rack of computers to appear in sort of like the cloud. And the thing that we found really compelling about this is that there's this materiality to technology and these tools that you can see it, you can touch it, it's stuff you can kick, but at the same time, the actual data and things that flow through there are also impenetrable at the same time. Now, it's certainly possible for somebody to go and like do packet sniffing and listen in on these on the transmissions that are going on inside of there, but for the most part, this is it's untouchable and imperceptible to us. And so as we see the lights flashing and the data moving through there, we understand that it's in there, but we don't necessarily know what it is or have access to it at the same time. Yeah, do you want to move on to the? Okay. Yeah, and so this is on the right-hand side. You can see this sort of globular looking piece that actually, when you get up close, it resolves itself really wonderfully. It's called Angels by Chinese artist Liu Berlin, and these are three wall-hanging sculptures that are in the shape of sort of like small cherubs or angels, but the sort of drapiness of them all is, when you get up close, you realize that these are actually USB phone chargers that actually make up the entire work. And so we liked this in as something that might be sort of aspirational or hopeful in the context of technology. It's got this this potential to sort of elevate us to there's this sort of whole transhumanism idea of like technology is going to sort of like help us reach some sort of new meaning of what it is to be human. But at the same time, as these cords kind of get pulled down, we're reminded that we're still sort of like anchored, right? And we're still tied to, the physical world in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And just to connect that piece with this piece, these chargers were primarily all an old cell phone chargers, and they are no longer useful. And thinking about technology and waste and the environment kind of also connects to the next piece by Wafa Bilal, because this piece also makes me think of space junk. But let me explain it first. So Wafa submitted 2 works into this exhibition. The bust on the left is an older work, and the piece on the right was a new commission for this exhibition. The one on the left is a replica of sculptures that once sat atop Saddam Hussein's palace. And there were these 3 really big 9-meter tall sculptures of Saddam Hussein with the Dome of the Rock from Palestine on his head. And so Wafa Bilal replicates that and creates it into this gold bust. And this is all revolving around a rumor that Wafa once heard about the Iraqi space mission wanting to create a replica just similar to this one and launch it into space, so that with the idea that it would orbit Earth for eternity. This never actually happened, and again, it was a rumor that Wafa heard, but he decided to create both this bust and this new commissioned sculpture on the right. I wonder if we have a small, closer image, Maya, of it, maybe? No, maybe not. Well, what it is it's an exact replica of the bust, but a very small 3D printed one that is put on an actual, thank you, Maya, this is perfect. That is put on an actual, that is created into an object that could actually be launched into space eventually for orbit itself. And Wafa was actually looking for funding to launch this piece into space, and he has yet to find it. But this is a launch-ready piece. So that's Wafa Bilal. In the background behind him, you see wallpaper by Ai Weiwei. And the shiny wallpaper that is gold, it's almost difficult to talk about because it is very self-descriptive. It is made up of
sorry, I'm trying to find a better view of it, but I'm not sure we have a good close-up. I'll do this one.
I think this one, this one's okay. So if you see the wallpaper is made up of golden glamoury surveillance cameras surrounding handcuffs that are in a circle, and in the middle is the Twitter bird. And then in addition to all of these things, there's also scattered, much more difficult to see, a golden sculpture of an alpaca. And these are all themes and ideas that Ai Weiwei works with a lot, very often in his work. He was known for being surveilled by the Chinese government on his social media and on his internet, and so his response to that was to actually post more, to the point where it becomes almost impossible to track somebody that has been this post has been replicated so intensely on Instagram, on social media. But then also he uses wordplay, like the use of the word alpaca, to create a situation that's difficult to censor, like a specific hashtag or a specific thread, because why would you censor the word alpaca? And so this work also, to me, is a reminder that we're always handcuffed to our social media, and that you cannot disconnect yourself from what you post on the internet. So hopefully it's a personal message too. And then to the right of this piece in the space, there was also on the wall, there was a series of phone cameras by an artist called Aram Bertal. Actually, maybe Maya, this view, yeah, that view is the best. Aram, this piece is called Unknown Gamer, and it's quite a simple to understand piece as well. Aram, during his different commutes, would notice that there were a lot of, myopic gamers, and he would film them at a very close range, and they would be completely oblivious to the fact that there is a man that they don't know is filming them while they're playing their game. And so then he displays these 6 selected out of many people, and then this brings up a lot of questions on privacy, on who's actually controlling the technology. Is the technology controlling us, or are we controlling it? Yeah.
Let's take a look at I want to touch on Munira's piece, and then on the going back to where we were.
The area we did cover also is Squint and Evan Ross and Jamie Allen.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of work in this exhibition, and one of the things that was really amazing was how different and varied the work was, how heterogeneous it was, and yet how together it very clearly all intersected with this kind of combination of anxiety and desire for this technology, right? Like, I want this beautiful phone, but this beautiful phone does things that I don't understand and that might be spying on me. I feel like that all the works in some way have this anxiety, this sort of aspirational anxiety around technology. And I'm going to now finally return to where we were, share my screen. I think that Munira Al-Qadiri's piece might be good just to mention this other aspect of technology that's so important for where we are in the Gulf.
Yeah, and so this was a new piece that was commissioned for the show, and these are replicas of drill bits that are used to drill for oil, and they're the actual objects themselves are like they look super alien, and they're really weird and lumpy, and the objects themselves, the actual drill bits are actually covered in diamonds to allow them to cut through rock in order to get really deep, and Munira was really fascinated with this as a way of talking about how we're using technology to sort of like exploit and understand the world, and how it's producing these sorts of this value for people that is that is generated in through labor and through people's works. And she realized that the sheen of like an oil slick is actually the same as the iridescence that you would find in a pearl. And so she painted these drill bits with the same sort of paint that has that sort of like quality to it. And so she was trying to draw parallels between the ways in which oyster divers in the Gulf used to sort of pull those up as a means for for generating profit, and the way in which oil is now used in the same way, right? And so, I think that she had hoped, we had talked about a great different number of ways of implementing this, maybe getting them to slowly spin around, or, mounting them on the wall. But I think that the three objects and artifacts that she produced here were actually like just incredibly lovely. And you're right, Maya, they were very different from, I think, some of the other pieces where there was like, we tend to think of technology as it's very like cold, cool, black and white sort of thing. And here she did something that was like extraordinarily colorful and still spoke to technology, but not necessarily about digital technologies, which a lot of the other works dealt with.
But somehow it sort of connects with that same anxiety in terms of, you know, the trade-off between the technology and what it gets us and how it gets us there. And I love that this sort of luminous, pearlescent finish to this piece echoes the Saddam Hussein gold bust, and then but then also the Ai Weiwei wallpaper. There's so much bling in this show. It's really, it was that particular triad was especially remarkable. So
I just want to note that
yeah.
Medina Al-Qadir actually did go on to make that the version of this piece that does float and spin, and it premiered in Crude Oil, the exhibition at the inaugural exhibition of Art Jamil. So yeah, she has done several different works around this theme, and she researches the connection between the cultural and historical connection between pearls and oil extensively.
Yeah, I thought that was a really poignant story because her own personal family history connects to this. Yeah. Okay, and then we turn the corner, and on the left are drawings by Taysir Batniji. It's an interesting pairing because these are works on paper. They're totally analog, but they're about a digital moment that I'll let the curators talk about. And of course, on the right is the work by Heather. So, Bana, would you just quickly introduce this relationship with Taysir, and then Heather, could you talk about your work?
Sure. So Taysir Batniji is a Palestinian artist. Thank you to Burjeel Art Foundation for this loan of this work. The piece is absolutely not as it's seen in this image, because you can actually see the people very clearly when you zoom out like this. When you're up close, it is a pixelated view of each of these blindfolded men. And the piece, as Maya mentioned, is pencil on paper, which is kind of like our oldest means of form of communication, as the most analog of all. And yet Taysir chose to create a pixelated image, literally drawing these people in shaded squares. So yeah, obviously these people are being seen through some kind of surveillance camera, and we're getting a very distant pixelated view. If you zoom out and you zoom away, they are clear. So the idea is that a lot of prisoners are often considered, when you're close to them, they're less human. And yeah, I could go on for hours about this piece. It's pretty epic. But moving on to Heather, Strange Revisions.
Yeah, so the work on the right is mine, Strange Revisions. It's from 2012. And this piece actually began in 2011 when I was sitting in a therapy session. And I was staring at this print that was across from me on the wall, and I was looking at this glass that covered the print. And suddenly I noticed that there was this crack in the glass, and there was this hair stuck in the crack. And I sat there for this hour staring at this hair and imagining the person who might have left it, and thinking about what they might be like, what they might look like, and what I could learn about them if I took that hair and, say, extracted DNA from it and analyzed it. And that launched me into this research project, which became the body of work Strange Revisions, where I went around the streets and public bathrooms and waiting rooms and subways of New York and collected genetic artifacts that strangers had left in public. So things like cigarette butts and chewed up gum, hairs and fingernails. And I brought those to a brand new do-it-yourself community biology lab that had recently opened up in downtown Brooklyn called GenSpace. This was the world's first community access biology lab. And I worked with the scientists there to extract the DNA, to amplify certain regions of it, and then to analyze it to make a guess at different traits that these people might have. And then I took those traits and I fed them into 3D generating software that I'd written that would create different possible versions of a person's face based on those traits. So if you feed in the different characteristics, you can generate infinitely many different versions of what that person might look like. And usually for each sample, I would generate somewhere between 5 and 7 different variations on that person's face. And I would look for one that spoke to me in some way that resonated with me, that made me feel something, or maybe that reminded me of someone that I knew. And then I output those using a 3D printer in full color. So what you see on the wall in the gallery are 5 different samples, 5 different faces that were printed from different DNA samples, cigarette butts and hair, etc., from different regions around New York. And underneath the 3D prints of the faces, you also can see these sample boxes. So the sample boxes contain the original sample itself, the cigarette butt, for example. They contain also a photograph of the place where the sample was found, a bit of data around the date that I collected the sample and where, and also a data card that prints out the data that I analyzed from that sample itself. So you can walk into the gallery and look at the faces and look at the data and, for example, think, was I in that place at that time? Could that be me? Could that be my face? And that was really what I was trying to get at with this work, was to make people think about this new vulnerability of the body that we're coming into as biotechnology advances, that your DNA is increasingly easy to read, and it's increasingly easy to read into. So always with surveillance of data, you can read things into that you want to find. And so I wanted to show that with these faces, that this biological data that's so incredibly personal was increasingly easy to access, even for someone like me, who was an amateur and who knew nothing really about molecular biology before starting the project.
This was one of the most, I feel like this generated so much discussion among our visitors. And one of the questions that we were asked, or one of the sort of things that I realized, was that that I don't think that you could read the age of the source of the DNA.
That's
So it
right.
might have been from a child or an old person. And so there's this sort of weird platonic ideal of this person's DNA as expressed in their late 20s, early 30s. They all seem to
Exactly.
have
I
this.
mean, that's the funny thing. I mean, and so that also shows you really about the bias of the computer programmer. So when I wrote the software for this piece, I was 30. And so I randomly parameterized the ages of the output faces between 20 and 40, because that would be obviously some kind of average that I thought made sense.
Yeah, of course. They look so young now. But, and then the other thing that was happening at the time, and I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I had heard that in Singapore, that for people who litter, they would take the litter and make a DNA print like this. Is this a true story? Vanna,
Okay,
did you
so
tell me this
partially
story?
true story.
Is this okay?
So it was Hong Kong. So it was called the Hong Kong Cleanup Campaign. It was actually an ad campaign done by the ad agency Ogilvy. And so they, in a way, you could say they kind of ripped me off. It was a couple of years after my piece was made. But basically, they worked with a DNA analysis company. So it was the ad agency plus a DNA analysis company. And they claimed to pick up different things around the streets of Hong Kong. And then they made these big posters and literally put them on the streets near maybe where the samples were supposedly found, or just in very public places, to call attention to basically that it's bad to litter. It was a bit of a different angle, and certainly a different motivation for work, but it was often, I received many questions if I had worked with them on that project, which I did not.
Which is what's interesting to me there is that it could be entirely fictional, but they're using the knowledge that went to work in your piece to scare the public about their DNA, or to shame them into complying and behaving. And this is some images from the opening. I'm just going to click through a few more of these. There's Bana and Scott. And this is a lie detector piece, which it's hard to explain, but it was quite delightful. And I think we should probably talk for just a second about this artificial artist created by Sibrin Versteeg, where he's programmed AI to paint copies of whatever is happening on the internet. So at any given time, there might be the Hulk or a mermaid or a landscape on the one side, and then the AI paints a copy of it on the other side. Here's another view of the phone's piece. People were completely mesmerized by this piece. It was great. And this gives you a better sense of the Tessir Batniji. These were, I found, really, really haunting sort of meditations on how this suffering can be so far removed from us through technology, and yet somehow even in the pixels you can feel it. Okay, so that's our virtual tour of the exhibition. There are a lot more great works in here, or at least several more that we haven't covered yet, but I think that gives people a feel for it. I wanted to ask Bana and Scott to talk for a minute about how you came up with this idea. This was one of the milestones for our gallery. I think at this point we were 2 years old, and one of our goals was to develop exhibitions in collaboration with ideas and research that was being produced by our faculty and by other guest curators who weren't necessarily, the goal is to create a space for exhibitions as a way to explore ideas and research in a different kind of format from the classroom or a typical publication. And so it was really exciting when Scott wanted to take this on, because curating a project, as we know, is not a small amount of work. So could you guys take us back to 2015 and how this developed for you?
I think it might have actually been even earlier than 2015. You know, when we first moved on to Saadiyat, you know, we Carlos and I, Carlos Geddes from the music program, he and I curated a show in the project space for Isaiah, and that was around the theme of reverberation, and we had and resonance, and we brought in a whole bunch of people who were affiliated with the conference that was going on at University of Zayed in Dubai, and Bana was instrumental in us getting that actually together, and I think that that's when she and I started to just sort of like really informally kick around the idea of like, hey, what if we were to do something like this? And from there, it became just an ongoing conversation that we would have. But I'm not sure. I mean, I think that it took us a while to actually put together a formal proposal of sorts. And even then, as we were discussing works, I think that we still had this really long iterative process where we would, we'd get together and have conversations, and I think we would like talk to you about one idea, and then we'd go off for like a few weeks and like go out for coffee and like have a whole bunch of conversations and come back with like a whole slew of different things that we wanted to talk about. Whether it was particular works that got us really excited or just general ideas around this. I think that's kind of like the origin of it. Bana, do you?
I think that was pretty accurate. I think like Scott said, a lot of discussions. We probably could have done many more exhibitions out of those discussions, but I think what one of the ideas that initially came out that kept coming up was the idea of our emotional connection to technology. We didn't want to do a show about technology, but we wanted to do something about both the anxiety, but then also the emotional connection, the fact that like our phones are always with us. The first thing that we look at in the morning, but you know, we'll never be able to have that same emotional connection. It will never be able to give us that emotional connection that we are asking of it. A lot, as well as like the you know, the black box mystery that you were talking about earlier, Maya. These are kind of things that kept coming up. At one point, we thought about the story of the emperor has no clothes as an idea, where you know, the masses are all going along with everybody else and not admitting that, hey, there might actually be something wrong with our technology. And so these are all the themes that kept rotating around the discussion that somehow landed in Invisible Threads, which is also, you know, we also did speak a lot about, you know, philosophy and invisible threads. It comes from Nietzsche, and the invisible threads are our strongest ties is the full word. And so, yeah, you know, actually curating with, this might lead us to the next conversation, but curating with a faculty member is really a wonderful special experience. Especially, I don't know if you noticed, but when Scott was introducing himself, he said, I do this and this and this, and I'm also doing this, and I'm also doing this. And this has been going on for years, since 2013, 14, when we first met him. So faculty members and artists are always doing a lot. And so to have the ability to actually have many discussions and curate with them was a great privilege.
I think the other thing that we talked about too, just to it's very generous to say it was a privilege, but I think that one of the other things that we talked about a lot that really that took hold here too is this idea of sort of, you know, talking about and exposing some of these frameworks that we operate in and are sort of assumed to be just how it is, right? And how we sort of accept technology into our lives and sort of say, oh, this is an obvious thing and I need to use it in this capacity, or this is what it does, and so that's what it is. And really wanted to sort of question that narrative and ask questions about, like, oh, could it be a different way, right? And how can we sort of use these tools that are sometimes by design set up to obscure what their actual function is, to really sort of like address that and sort of peel back a little bit of the curtain of what's going on behind them.
So then I'm going to ask, you could do this in your artwork and in your teaching and your writing. What on earth would possess you to take on another project? And I ask Heather the same question. Why and I love that artists curate. That's a given. For me, it's an unbelievable opportunity to see the work through the eyes of an artist. It's everybody brings a different perspective, and artists bring a particular perspective that's very nourishing, I think, to me as a curator, and bracing and important. And so I guess the question for the artist is, why would the artist curate? What draws you to curating? What do you get out of it? And you know, what sort of ends does it serve? Do you do this because you're a faculty member? Do you do it? You know, I think that Heather, I know you've curated outside of the academy for sure. So talk a little bit about what it means to you as an artist, how it relates to your practice, but also perhaps how it relates to your role as faculty at NYU.
Yeah, no, that's a really it's a really good question, and I think that you know, addressing it both from the perspective of an artist and as faculty is, in my mind, they're kind of like jumbled up anyhow. But you know, I think that there are ways to sort of articulate how each one fits. As an artist, I think that it's important to sort of, and I think that Heather sort of said this the other day, but you know, is sort of like a way of honoring and sort of like celebrating the work of people who you respect and maybe would like to think of as your peers, right? And so it was also an opportunity for me to, in the process of doing research, to get to know more of what people are doing, what are they doing in their practice, what are they, what are they getting themselves up to, which is always really interesting because a lot of times, as artists, we kind of withdraw a little bit into our own realms, and while we may collaborate with people and we're still working with others, there's also sometimes a tendency to retreat into the studio and just sort of do work for a while without acknowledging or interfacing with other people as intensely as perhaps we could.
So it's sort of a way to engage with other artists at a level that you might not be able to do just attending an exhibition, for example, or reading about it. Yeah. Heather, what
Yeah.
about you? What's your
Yeah, I think
thoughts
for
there?
me, it comes from a place of really deep respect. Um, so generally, the artists that I have curated are people that I know either because we've exhibited together or we've worked together in some capacity. And I know them in that way already. I know them as artist to artist, but I don't know them in this very deep way that you get to know someone when you curate their work, when you have studio visits with them, when you have this really a working relationship that's all about you listening to them and also about you eliciting from them a kind of greater understanding of their own work. So that for me is really incredibly rewarding. And the other aspect of it that is really interesting is getting to shape the thing. And so as an artist, you're always being put in other people's contexts, but you don't get to say what the context is. And so when you curate, you get to say, this is the thing I think is really important, and here are the artists that are manifesting that.
That's something that I forget that that an artist doesn't, you kind of go where you are curated unless you create your own exhibition, and that's a really interesting point. And it's the intimacy. It's true that the relationship to the artist is, for as a contemporary art curator, is one of the most incredible conversations. And I know that artists do this in studio visits together as well. But it's interesting to think about this from both of your perspectives, how you bring to it an immediacy in thinking about the work kind of in its own terms, like you're able to approach it from the perspective of your practice, but also to see it from the outside in a way that um, sounds really, it's different, I think, probably from how a non-artist curator such as myself might look at the work. And this is, I don't know, Bana, if you had this experience in your when you were talking to Scott about work.
Yeah, definitely 100%. I agree with you, Maya.
I'm
I'd
glad we got
also,
that sorted out.
I mean, the other thing that was a real joy for me was just getting to experience like what the act of curation is like, because for as an artist, we, as Heather said, like we're kind of like put into perspectives of how people want to see our work, or the dialogue that we're asked to sort of participate in, and seeing the process through which that emerges was really valuable for me to understand from the perspective of the curator. How does that come together? What are the questions that are being asked? And what really are the considerations when putting together a show? And so that was a really an incredibly valuable experience for me in this whole sort of thing.
And the last question in this series, sort of exploring our roles with relationship to each other and to the artists in the exhibition, is when you are curating for, how do you think about your audience? And I think that, at the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery, we know our audience will be students, but we also know that it's a mix of different publics. And to what extent, can you talk a little bit about how you were envisioning your audience, and if curating in this context versus other contexts is noticeably different. And I think that this is a question for Heather, since I know that you've curated in a couple different areas. Scott, I don't actually know your curatorial history, but let's start with Heather.
Sure. Yeah, I think of my audience similar to how I think of my audience for my own work as being, in a way, the general public. So it's less, I think, less about kind of a highly refined fine art audience, and probably less about like a high tech audience, and more about kind of a general audience. So anyone who could walk in and take something away from it. And I guess it is also, I'm thinking about bringing out aspects of our relationships to technology in the exhibition, so in the work. So what I'm hoping is that really anyone who has some kind of relationship to technology can walk in and feel something that makes them see that technology differently, so that when they leave, they have a new relationship to the technology that they're using in their lives all the time.
Okay, I see you nodding. I want to remind our audience that we will be wrapping up in 5 to 10 minutes. And if you have questions, please go ahead and submit them in the Q&A. We have one now that's come in that says, what does it mean for you to curate in an educational context, such as a university? I would like to throw this to everybody, but specifically Bana, because you have just moved from a university context to major museum in Chicago, which is a different audience, a different mandate, and presumably I would wonder if this changes how you think about your curatorial practice at all in terms of the context.
Yes, definitely. I think, again, like Maya said, it's not that we're curating for students only. We're also curating for, people on campus, off campus, and also, depending on the year, we think about, who might be coming from our international audience at NYUAD. But I think the biggest difference for me is the amount of space, or the amount of galleries, or the amount of areas. So at the Museum of Contemporary Art, there's approximately 8 other exhibitions going on at the same time as whatever I'm showing. And so thinking about the thread through those exhibitions is very different than thinking about the thread through a season at NYUAD Art Gallery. And so, I think the intimacy of a university museum, the fact that a university museum will be visited by students and classes, and our exhibitions are often on syllabi, and just the idea that students and the general public can come as often as they want. It's free and very, very accessible, and they can really marinate on exhibitions, and are encouraged to marinate on exhibitions without much competition.
Any other thoughts on this front, on the curating in an educational context? Yeah.
I can add maybe a couple thoughts. So I think it makes this didactic role of an exhibition explicit, which is really interesting. So it gives you this chance to think in this explicitly didactic way about the work. So to take something that maybe you would curate the same show somewhere else, but you have to think about it in a new way. So you have to think about kind of how does it engage a student audience, how does it engage faculty, and kind of what are pathways that those viewers will take into the work, how can they incorporate it into their classrooms, how can you kind of think through the artists, kind of think, well, which of these artists could fit into classes. So it makes something that would have been there in a more subtle way before. I mean, always an exhibition is educational, we just don't usually think about it that way. And it makes that really, really clear.
It's also interesting to think about the the origin of the university gallery, there's sort of two threads that come together. One is the campus, the university collection that's used for study that may or may not have a gallery associated with it. And the other is the public facing exhibition component and what that does to sort of encourage a conversation between the communities, because so many universities are these bubbles, right? And so this, in theory, the exhibition is a place where is a permeable place where the public and the students and the faculty are mingling without sort of being segregated in the way that a university can do to a community. And one of the things that really has jumped out for me is that the exhibition, the audience is in a way what makes the exhibition, that moment of exchange with the audience and those conversations. Every time I give a tour, the story grows and changes depending on who's with me in that tour and how they're talking to each other and how they're talking to me. And that this is its own kind of moment of informal knowledge production that happens in a way that is distinctly educational and yet doesn't feel like you're being lectured to, because I'm the one learning from the audience, right? And I feel like this definitely happens in non-academic museums, but that it becomes something, like you say, that we make explicit in our mission. And it's funny because I've done it for so long. University museums are where I've worked forever. And so I'm always, when I think about how Bana talks about a show when she's pitching an idea, it becomes a totally different thing. You're not going to say, these are the syllabi the show could speak to, and this is the, it's just a really different way of thinking about the exhibition. And yet at the root, there's still this role that an exhibition plays that transcends academia versus non-academia, I think. Okay, other thoughts as we wrap up? I think we're, oh, good. Okay, so Heather and I will be announcing an exhibition very soon. And what I find so interesting and challenging about it is that it will be an exhibition that, instead of you walking into it and being immersed in the exhibition you will immerse it. So the exhibition walks into your hands and this is your exhibition. And that suddenly the space of the gallery is this big, and we gave ourselves this frame as the limit. So you can see it on your desktop, but it's really, we're thinking about, instead of the white cube, this little black box, and returning in a way to some of the questions in Invisible Threads, but from a wholly different perspective, partly just because of the fact that this is the gallery. So I won't say more now unless Heather wants to jump in, but I think that.
No, let's keep it a mystery.
It's a mystery.
Surprises to come.
It's a mystery in so many ways. Okay. Thank you guys so much. It's really good to see you again, Scott. And I know it's the first week of classes, Heather and Scott, for both of you. So thank you for making time at the busiest time of your semester. And I wish you all luck with everything. And Bana, thank you for getting up extra early, Seattle time, to make it to this event. Thank you.
Thank
you all.